Day of Introspection, a 2CP and ketamine trip report by Particle 16, posted to earwid.org, May 7th, 2009. I spent a lot of the last week reading experience reports, as well as Shulgin's brief notes regarding 2CP. The reports were varied, and for the most part every bad report I read screamed of people without proper planning, set or setting. This sounded like serious stuff, so it deserved some respect and planning. So we decided to get up in the morning and spend 16 hours on this strange psychedelic after being well rested, and not disrupt the sleeping patterns of our holidays too much. This 2CP I picked up about 4 years ago or so was a side note to a lot of 2CI that I got at the time. The 2CI was pretty hit and miss, a few times being barely noticeable, and one time quite strong. So we had a few caps of 6mg and 10mg, and considering the age I decided we might as well try with 10. I weigh about 85 kilograms and am a vegan. In the past we've tried a variety of acid tabs, MDMA, baby woodrose seeds, DMT, salvia, several types of mushrooms and a large amount of ketamine, as far as psychedelic substance experience goes. At 10:15 am, 10mg of 2CP taken in a gel cap with water. Nothing had been eaten since the day before other than a single piece of toast with some nutty spread. 11:18 am. Something is slowly happening. My back is sore like another report I read, but this could be from the fact that I've spent the last hour running up and down the stairs in the process of setting up our environment, and I'm sitting weirdly towards the PC as the audio cable is a little short to the amp. I generally have pretty bad posture, I think. I feel like the onset of MDMA, but in the very early stages. My cheeks are tingling a little bit, and listening to trippy music on large speakers is a dash trippier than usual. I assume this is anxiety. 11:27 am. Time to watch something, as I'm restless, energetic. 11:44 am. Feeling a little giddy, a tiny bit confused and flustered. This could all be anxiety though, with a little bit of jaw clenching and the temperature getting a bit colder as well. Guess we should start feeling things soon. 12:03 pm. Going to the toilet a bit to urinate, probably anxiety again. I'm drinking quite a bit of liquid too. I think I'm seeing tiny traces and shadows occasionally. My stomach is a bit bloated. There's a slight euphoria and giddiness. At this stage I notice a trail of ants going to the dishwasher. For the next hour I swept up ants occasionally and threw them out the back. I think I imagine the amount of ants occasionally though, and as I often do on acid, I get a bit hung up about mess in our very clean place and resist the urge to tidy up. 12:25 pm. There are some fairly strong onset moments. A bit of discomfort, but once I focus on relaxing, getting over those things, they disappear and a light euphoria returns. About the last hour, I felt a little cold, and it's bothered me more than it should. 1:25 pm, things are a little intense by now. Trying to watch a movie till the end, but emotions and feelings seem to be intertwined. I think visuals and the like will hit when I let go, just getting over the discomfort for a bit. 1:49. Pretty overwhelmed now. Visuals and swirling hitting hard. Discomfort comes in waves and is mainly due to the intensity. I notice stronger colourings in peripheral vision and movement in shadows, a slight trembling like on acid. 2:09 pm, had to deal with the cat being sketchy. I'm so overwhelmed at this stage, I feel like giggling a lot. 3:18 pm, I'm totally gone now. Very strong swirling visuals and colours are present and typing is very hard. 5:17 pm. Still powerful visuals. Time for some music, I think. The music was rather intense. I think we missed a few hours of this at its major peak by trying to focus on a funny series that was a lot of fun, but it can tire you out fairly quickly, especially with an overload of the senses going on. Time seems to have gone rather quickly as well. The visuals during the music were a bit more abstract, plastic and futuristic as compared to the more organic fractals I've felt on acid before. 6:01 pm. Put some food on to heat, and now I put the TV on. Let me say, Bold and the Beautiful is a dodgy show in this situation, but we're having trouble deciding what we want to watch in terms of entertainment. 6:48 pm. Getting tired, still a strong long vibe and colourings. 8:12 pm, and we just noticed in the last half hour that things are starting to wind down a little. having eaten some steamed Asian buns and some fresh Turkish bread with oil. Watched an episode of Jamie at home and craved for some fantastic pumpkin soup. Real craving for tasty food going on right now. E just got a phone call from her mum. It wasn't exactly good news either, but she's holding together fine. So she's had to snap back hard into having it together, and she's had a couple of Panadine too for a mild headache she was getting, and an immunisation injection she had in the morning that has left her arm sore and a little bruised. I made some realisations during the music regarding negativity in my life at work. I feel like I'm going to have a fresh approach on it for the new year. Still considering some ketamine way later. We'll see how that goes. I'm not considering cannabis though. Normally I'd love it to relax and lose some of the edge, but I know that with acid and 2CI it brings the intensity back. And I don't want that either. 11 PM, just passing the 12-hour mark, and there are still colourings, a bit of a fuzzy and confused head, but that's mixing in with the tiredness now. At 1 AM or so, it's time to prepare the ketamine. I crush up 300mg finally and set up my MP3 player and environment. E is a bit too tired for it, and I'm somewhat prepared for this to be very intense, which I know she's not really into, and she's worried about not being able to sleep, as I'm about to find out. I cut the ketamine up into 3 lines and snort the first one. I can barely feel it even going in, which is surprising. So, I clean up the last 2 lines, and after about 2 to 3 minutes snort the last 2 lines as well, distributing them between the nostrils. I go and lie down on the bed. E tucks me in, and I put on some music. From what I remember, I didn't feel the K on set at all, and never tasted it either. From what I remember 2 days later, the trip was beyond intense. Probably the most intense I've ever had, including combining ketamine with 2CI, acid and mushrooms on separate occasions. It's hard to remember sequence, but I do remember bits while being totally knocked out. There is a portion of chamber movement I usually feel on K. These chambers usually involve people that are dear to me, and probably the portions of the mind that store my memories and understanding of them. I feel their essence or spirit. This time it was extremely vivid and in a similar fashion to Neo in the first Matrix breaking out of the harvesting growing chamber he was in. In that moment, I felt like I broke out from the constraint on rails that my ketamine trip usually has, and despite how chaotic it was, I felt a large amount of control throughout the whole journey. I felt interaction with a few beings as well. Not sure who they were exactly, but one of them was definitely a black rapper, while the other was wearing a spacesuit. It's surprising because hardly ever do I actually feel real people on Ket, and rarely are they ever full visual and personal experiences. I'm not sure what they taught me, but it felt like a debrief to a mission. I remember feeling like I was very high up, and looked straight across and saw large high-rise apartment buildings. I saw every person in those buildings, and understood that each of these was a single organism with just a slight difference between them. I make a realization about each human being and its wants and needs being a collective combination of the instincts within each cell and atom within them. Therefore, one person longing for their girlfriend is really just a combination of their cells and their survival instinct, and everything really just being a refined combination of the needs hierarchy. I remember something about Gaia and humanity's abuse of the Earth. Wonder why people don't embrace this planet a bit more. And I'm reminded of video games where the likes of the Protoss feel a nationalistic honour for their home planet. I wonder if humanity could ever embrace this in the same way. I'm a bit of a passionate greenie, so that's an issue dear to my heart. 2 AM. I've snapped out of the K-trip for the most part, and had a moment to remember who I was. At this stage, my brain starts to selectively choose which of the senses it wants to use. For instance, I can feel E's presence in the bed. I can hear our oscillating fan, which is making a harrowing reverb. I can feel the texture of the bed, but my visuals are some sort of dark neon Egyptian theme of exactly the same room I'm in. Then, it'll change and be a beach. Then it'll change and be some sort of futuristic lounge. At times, I feel like I'm outdoors looking up at a canopy of foliage. The oscillation of the fan has a metallic tingle, and my brain interprets 50s American music coming out of an AM radio in a diner. There's a few moments where I lose total knowledge of self. This usually only happens during the ketamine stage from above, after hitting the K-hole. This time I seem to cycle through a few identities, and I'm convinced that I'm speaking, According to E, I didn't speak but had some strange staggered breathing and swallowing. I feel like my body is just a vessel and a giant pool of spiritual identities, to be honest, and it's trying to influence it and possibly take it over, although it's not as scary as it sounds at the time. Think about the idea of getting a human being into this 2C and ketamine state, keeping them suspended in it for nefarious scientific purposes. The potential of the visuals I'm able to generate, just incredible. I see the first atom attracting to another at the dawn of time, and through the cause and effect, see whole galaxies being formed as I fly through them. This extends into all of evolution, through the interaction of organisms and their survival instincts and genetics. I wonder if combined with some sort of telepathy or psychic enhancement, the brain could be used as an intense supercomputer of calculation and simulation. But how could you focus such a beast? Even further, I wonder about manifestation of matter and what could be created if such a psychic enhancer was created. These are the kinds of fairly lucid and structured, yet chaotic and impossible thoughts going through my head right now. 3:50 AM. It's impossible to switch my brain off. It's been running at 10 times the usual speed, and I swear, it's been putting together some amazing graphics and visualizations during this whole time. At this stage, I start to use a meditation technique to selectively focus on less and less things, but my brain is ingenious at trying to keep itself going. I start to think that acid and the like awakens primal vibrations within each cell of the body, and these cells, maybe through their memory of Gaia, are trying to communicate with me directly. But then who really am I? A collective combination of their essence and consciousness? Or could it be that I'm a spirit that attaches to this vessel on its life journey? There's moments when the visualizations are plain evil and menacing, but I'm strong enough to steer them into a positive path. Wonder if a human brain was grown in a lab, where would its consciousness come from? If it was implanted into some other organic creation or otherwise, would it adopt the consciousness of its cells? A lot of my trips centered around these themes, and the wealth of knowledge I felt I had tapped into was purely immense. At this stage I have a Panadine, as the headache I could slightly feel a few hours ago is now coming in slow waves. I don't want it to get any worse, and hope that the combination of paracetamol and codeine might help me sleep. E has been sleeping on and off. I assume she goes into a slow trip and occasionally wakes from it, moves a bit and goes back, sort of like coming down off acid and trying to sleep. It's now 4:30 AM, and I wonder if I'll sleep at all, but my meditative tripping control seems to be working occasionally, and I managed to get myself to a state where I'm pretty sure I can hear myself snoring. I've given up control of my body, and have isolated the last excited part of the brain. 10 AM. I must have slept right after about 4:30 AM. For the rest of the day, I feel really good, if just a little tired, and we have an early night. I smoked some cannabis a few times, but unlike smoking after acid, mushrooms or MDMA, there is no further intensity or comeback of previous effects to the usual stoned feeling. Overall, 2CP was very interesting. It reminded me of acid and mushrooms without the nausea that I usually get on those. Felt a little bit less natural and organic, but it was enjoyable. The length of time, I think, is a fairly big part in consideration for it though. I lost 24 hours of my life, and a good quarter of the time was discomfort or confusion. The combination of 2Cs and ketamine is insane, as discovered by DM Turner. This is a combination that's beyond anything I've ever experienced with the psychedelic drugs I've tried. It has so much control, so much potential, but it's incredibly draining afterwards as well. I needed some serious backbone to stay in control and not have a horrid trip. I must say that as much as I felt in control, I also felt like I hadn't got any control at times as well. I forgot between sections of the trip. Well, this is a combination that's impossible to describe, but I do recommend great caution. Great control over circumstances and surroundings is necessary for this. The benefit has been profound. A ketamine and nitrous oxide trip report by Zulu, posted to earwid.org February 25th, 2017. I hope my experience here can shed light on what is happening with the synergy of these two substances. I'll try to be brief and only provide what I believe is relevant information, although it is tied in with a story of alcoholism. I'm a 32-year-old successful business owner with numerous college degrees. I've also been an alcoholic over half my life. I've made numerous attempts to quit drinking over the past 16 years to no long-term avail. That was until this past year. Psychedelics have played an instrumental role in unlocking my psychotic patterns of perpetual self-destruction through alcohol. The first 3 months of alcohol abstinence are a living hell. It is the most physically, psychologically, and spiritually challenging and exhausting marathon ever. I felt like a tiny lost sailboat in a Category 5 hurricane. I am now happier and healthier now than I've ever been in my entire life. I took kratom and smoked cigarettes often during the day, and occasional nitrous oxide at night, to relieve the tension and ease the cravings of withdrawal. After 4 months of this, my body had detoxed more than ever in 16 years. I started to come alive again. I'd been sober for 10 months, and off kratom for at least 3. I was still smoking cigarettes and vaping regularly, like many alcoholics in recovery. I should note that I'd been seeing an addiction therapist, as well as being on the paleo diet. So my body was very clean, almost exclusively home-cooked meals with organic whole foods and almost zero sugar consumption. To this day though, I do enjoy having a few hits of nitrous after work from time to time. A good friend of mine had some pharmaceutical-grade ketamine and asked if I wanted to try it. I'd only ever heard anecdotal reports about it prior. He is a very intelligent and trustworthy person who I respect highly. He informed me that ketamine has virtually zero temporary or long-term negative side effects, and is not physiologically addicting. So just as a side note, this is me talking, not the report, but this isn't actually true. There are a lot of long-term negative side effects from abusing ket, and while it's not physiologically addicting in general, lots of people have reported that there are physiological side effects from abusing it. However, in the case of this person just using it the once, obviously there aren't going to be from just a single usage, but it is very possible to become psychologically addicted to ketamine, as yours truly had become for a very long time, and it did have a lot of long-term and short-term negative side effects that obviously can be combated by abstaining from usage, just getting your life back on track in terms of your diet, and just general mental clarity. The worst thing for me for long-term ketamine use has been the adverse effects it's had on my concentration, my attention span, and just general effects to do with my perception of reality that is distorted, put me in a dissociative bubble for a long time. But it must be said that this was due to high levels of abuse over the course of a year. So yeah, just bear that in mind, that it's not actually true that there is zero negative side effects. Even just with one single use, people can experience some form of bladder discomfort. So that's just a very, very short-term side effect that won't last the entire experience and will clear up after a few days. But obviously if you're abusing this for a long time, you are going to seriously damage your bladder. And it's also been purported from people that there could be some form of brain damage if you're using it for a very long time. So yeah, just bear in mind that whilst these substances can induce very positive healing experiences, like in this report, it must be said that their safety profile is not on the level of psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD, and there is much more of a higher potential for addiction. But yeah, we'll get back into it. I'd also heard some psychiatrists as prescribing ketamine for patients with depression, having somewhat successful results. So decided I'd go and try it with him. The onset. At 9 PM on a Wednesday evening, my friend and I insufflated approximately 100 milligrams of powdered ketamine in the comfort of my own home. I had no defined intentions nor expectations, besides the curiosity of what bodily or psychosomatic effects would take place. The set and setting was both relaxed and optimistic, as well as safe and honest. I had no idea the experience to come would positively affect me for days and months afterwards. Immediately after snorting, there was a distinct nasal burn, but not unbearable. This subsided after 10 to 15 minutes. After 5 to 10 minutes, I felt heavy and slightly off balance. I also felt a little bit disoriented and almost drunk, but without the euphoria. I'll admit, the ketamine alone is not all that enjoyable. Bright lights are overpowering, and I got a bit of anxiety. My friend and I chatted for 30 more minutes or so. I felt a bit awkward and uncomfortable, and decided that ketamine wasn't for me, and I just wanted it to be over. So I excused myself to retire for the rest of the night. As I often do right before bed to relieve tension or slip into a more relaxed state, I decided to do a few hits of nitrous. I was alone in bed in almost complete darkness and silence when I took 2 full canister hits of nitrous from my whippet dispenser. What was about to take place was by far the most psychedelic and transcendent experience I've ever had in my entire life. I'll note, as well, that I have used numerous psychedelics at varying dosages over the past 14 years, including mushrooms, LSD, mescaline, MDMA, DMT, salvia, and various others. The experience, or trip. Immediately, I fell to the centre of a beautifully coloured Victorian-era ballroom with ornate details and high ceilings. It was silent inside. Not scary, but definitely foreign. There, however, was a playful sense of humour and light-heartedness about the room. All of a sudden, I began transforming into a 4-sided pyramid made out of colourful ground beef or meat. My chest, back, and left arm unfolded into 3 meat staircases before I knew it, and I looked over to my right arm, transforming from what I normally would recognise as my right arm into an incredible meat staircase. It was beyond just visual. I could feel my body transforming quite intensely, although not painfully. As my right arm was almost completely transformed, I got an intense rush of fear. I was no longer myself. I was now a colourful, meaty pyramid staircase inside of this decadent ballroom, and I had come to terms with it real quick. I remember saying aloud to myself as my new reality took form, "This isn't fair." Then, I came to in my bed with a heart attack of amazement. The undeniable authenticity and palpable realness of what had just happened was clearly as real as shooting hoops with a friend, swimming in the ocean, having dinner, making love, or getting into a car accident. It was very real. Absolutely flabbergasted and laying there in bed, I was fully apprehensive to do any more. But I knew I had just stumbled upon a goldmine, a new and unique opportunity to dive into uncharted psychedelic waters. So, I loaded up 2 more nitrous canisters. I inhaled them both swiftly, and within seconds, a primitive drawing of a single face appeared in front of me. The face was smooth orange and red like a nice sunset. It had an intense presence. I opened my eyes, and I was still in my bedroom, but the face was still in front of me. It then began multiplying rapidly, filling over the walls and ceiling. I looked at my body, and it too began transforming into thousands of replicas of this face. Then, that's all there was. Infinite faces everywhere. I was mortally terrified, pulsating with fear. Again, I began to change forms, and was losing my identity forever, so it seemed. The fear was overwhelming. But then I had to let go, and accept that I was now a massive array of fractal faces travelling at light speed. I thought I had died, and that this was my transcendent welcoming. Immediately though, I transported back into my bed with an even greater appreciation for the visceral nature of what had just happened. I could not believe I or any other human was capable of experiencing such intense hallucinations and reality changes. With my eyes wide open, I laughed aloud in complete shock. It was simply unbelievable, and I was deathly afraid to continue. But I did feel it was somehow pertinent to explore the catacombs of my own mind. After all, I may never do this again, and I did want to commit to this wild journey. I had to remind myself that I'm safe in my bed, and that these Salvador Dali-like realities I'm entering are just temporary and impermanent, no matter how intense they may feel. I then did 10 to 15 more nitrous canisters, all with equally bizarre and perplexing hallucinations, but none quite as intense and symbolic as the two previously described. Another of these hallucinations included a gnome standing on my desk, spinning a meat grinder, which was sucking in all the material possessions in my room, turning them to dust. In another, my body was growing snakes out of it, and dancing with beautiful black snake women. The one where I really had to draw the line was where a fireball ripped out of my cheek, flew through my window, and crashed into my garage, setting it ablaze. That one felt too real. In fact, I feared I may cross the two realities and hurt myself or somebody else if I could shoot fireballs out of my mouth into my garage. So, I decided to stop. Post-experience and effects. That night, I slept like a baby, and I woke up refreshed and ready for work on time as usual. In fact, I had a new glow that I'd never felt before. Typically, I'm very rushed and high-strung all day working with numerous clients, all on time-sensitive schedules. The stress is high, and I'm always rushing. That morning, and for the next week, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm and relaxation, and my tension and anxiety had almost completely diminished. Things I'd normally fret over, like slow drivers in the morning or people wasting my time at work, etc., these had no power to drain my energy as they normally do. In fact, I saw how irrelevant and wasteful those thought patterns were to my energy. I very much enjoyed every moment of the next week at work and home. And amazingly, I had zero cravings for nicotine and have not smoked since. I consumed ketamine by itself 1 month later at 100 milligrams. I did not hallucinate, as no nitrous was mixed. I did, however, though, feel the same emotional and psychological effects of relaxation, anxiety suppression, and a sense of calm throughout my day for the next week. After a week, the intensity of the calmness began to wear off, and the stress of normal life crept back in. I consumed about 30 milligrams of K just a few days ago, a very small amount, which I felt almost zero effects of sedation from. I laid down in bed with the lights off and took 2 canisters of nitrous. Even at such a low dose of ketamine, I was able to visit similar dimensions of obscurity. The hallucinations were incredible again, but not quite as intense or ego-threatening as last time. I had trouble recollecting them as well. The next week or so, I did not feel the same intense relaxation and calm as the previous 2 times using ketamine. I'd surmised that the K is having lasting effects throughout my neurological pathways, long after the 1 hour high that it seems to last for. My therapist said it pretty clearly that it's a tranquilizer, and it seems to be making you more tranquil. From what I have gathered from the psychedelic community over the past 10 years, is that psychedelics can often induce mystical experiences in us, shattering our frail concepts of culturally constructed reality and personal identity. These realities we construct are far too often self-limiting or self-deprecating. Psychedelic experiences can cut to the core of our being, helping us see the beauty of our world and the temporal nature of our precious life, often freeing us from the grips of the past. With the combination of ketamine and nitrous, I can see 2 major benefits. The ketamine alone, no doubt, has stress-reducing effects for days after. The wild hallucinations from the combination of ketamine and nitrous allowed me to see my culturally constructed identity, watch it massively transform out of my control, and finally let it go. I believe this is, or is similar to ego death. Another major benefit to ketamine and nitrous is that it is short in duration and almost completely benign on the body. Other psychedelics can last a very long time, and are difficult to navigate with negative emotions. I feel as though hallucinating in a safe environment and with short duration, even at great intensity, can be a positive stressor. For example, giving a speech is a positive stressor. There is lots of anxiety, expectation, and planning going into a speech, but once successfully delivered, feels incredibly rewarding. The stress of a successfully completed trip, coupled with positive mood tranquilizing effects which linger for up to a week, I believe are tremendously positive. For a recovering alcoholic with a high-stress life, seemingly on the verge of relapse every day, the benefit of this relatively gentle yet effective combination of substances has been utterly profound. So here I think we've got probably one of the most exceptional ketamine trip reports we've ever come across, really. This is called a Ketamine Breakthrough, Becoming God by Backer from the Actualize.org forum. You're really in for a treat with this one. It finally goes into all the in-depth metaphysical aspects that the K-hole experience can induce, so yeah, hope you enjoy. This is something that happened to me yesterday that I will never be able to forget. This was one of the most transformational experiences of my life, and keep in mind that I have done LSD, mushrooms, DMT and 5-MeO in high doses. I have had profound spiritual experiences with psychedelics, and especially with 5-MeO. For me, these experiences are deeply existential and life-changing. I read a few reports about people dying and going to the other side using high doses of ketamine that literally shut off the brain completely. Found this interesting article today on Reddit. Anyway, let's get to the actual report. Keep in mind that my experience isn't really what most people will experience on ketamine, and I think that is due to the intensive spiritual work that I have done in the past. I've been experimenting with mind-altering substances for years with good integration, for the purpose of understanding reality as it is. Also been doing plenty of spiritual work and verifying Leo's spiritual content. I started by dividing 600 mg of ketamine into 4 lines for insufflation. Then I snorted 1 line every 30 seconds or so for better absorption. After completing all the lines, I started to feel my consciousness expanding in a very interesting way. I could compare this feeling to the come up of an LSD trip where everything starts to breathe and colours get more vibrant. After a few minutes I started to lose attachment to my surroundings, and things started to feel part of me. It felt like I was imagining my phone and everything around me. Slowly I got to a level where I couldn't understand who I was anymore, and my vision just exploded into infinite geometrical patterns. My ego then started to panic, and looking around for any leads to get grounded in the experiences, but it was too late. I was long gone. I lost all awareness of my body. I did not know who I was and where I was, and I was this melting, intelligent energy. I was pure being in a world of constantly changing patterns and stripes of geometrical patterns. I had no sense of time, whether of past, present or future, so I could say I was in a roller coaster ride in a multi-dimensional giant fractal for infinity and beyond. This went on and on and on and on and on. This was the scariest place I've ever visited in my life. Even worse than the one I experienced on a high dose of salvia. I was being killed in infinite ways, and there was no way to understand what was going on. I didn't even know what Earth was, or that I was even a human at all. All I knew was infinity and pure beingness. This kept on for a good while before I gave up totally, And that was the moment where I was transported into the mind of God. I realised that I am the creator of the entire universe, and that everything and everyone is just really me. My memories then started to come back to me, and I became conscious that I was creating all of the things and people I thought were separate from me, like my friends and house. I was this powerful, pure energy, circulating for infinity and a sense of oneness that pervaded me. There is no secret to hide or anything to fear, because really all is one. How could I be so stupid? I grew up in a religious family where I was told that God is this separate entity that judges the bad and rewards the good. But in the moment, I was literally it. That was a very unbelievable feeling. Every time I wanted to deny this power, God took me on an infinite journey to show me who I really am, until I gave up completely. This was one of the most powerful moments of my entire life. Then I decided to divide myself into different energies, or souls, to experience life from different perspectives, and slowly I started to imagine my hands into being. It felt like I was watching a hand for the very first time of my life, and it was so beautiful. Look at these fingers. What an elegant creation. I then became this entity in a physical body, but was still conscious of what I have just experienced. Life is really crazy and beautiful. Take care of this amazing gift that you gifted yourself. Simply enjoy the ride. You are me, and I am you. Separation is an illusion. Hope you enjoyed this quick report. Motherly love, puppy love, ecstatic sex, then absolute stillness, and the universe laughed. A 200mg of ketamine and 150mg of modafinil trip report sent in by a subscriber. I'm a late 40s health professional in small-town Midwest USA who bumbled into the world of psychedelics by listening to Joe Rogan and Aubrey Marcus podcasts. My wife and I had both struggled with depression related to childhood trauma, and we were getting nowhere with traditional medication. We found an underground guide for MDMA-assisted therapy, and were blown away by the immediate insights and peaceful acceptance that the medicine brought us. Soon after, we learnt about the healing effects of ketamine. I've had several experiences of both medicines taken at 6-week intervals utilising the inner journey format, relaxed with earplugs and eye mask. For me, this facilitates amazing clarity of mind, and allows me to learn the most from the experience. I am exceedingly careful not to overuse, and I commit to at least 2 integration sessions with my trusted therapist between journeys. I'm hoping that psychedelic medicine becomes accessible to the greater population, because it is our human birthright to connect with these higher states of consciousness and wisdom. I had a day off, and the kids were at school. I took 150mg of modafinil at 7 AM, an hour before plugging 200mg of ketamine to potentiate my awareness and recall. My ketamine experience usually only lasts 3 to 4 hours, so my intention was to get an early start and have a productive afternoon. This was a moderately high dose for me, so the experience hit pretty hard within about 20 minutes. I would consider this experience to be what is called a K-hole, when you are immobilized, slumped in your chair, unable to interact with the outside world. It is a very pleasurable experience. I lost any feeling of my peripheral body, arms and legs. The best way to describe the feeling is as if your heart centre is all of you, and all of your sensations are coming through your heart versus your extremities, eyes and ears. You see and hear and feel, but do so in another realm. Or maybe your physical body is bypassed, and you're experiencing the environment through your spirit body, aka soul, astral body, energy body, etc. But who knows? For me, ketamine visuals are very tactile and textured, like different kinds of blankets of different colours and fabrics. There is a living energy to the visuals that seem to be vibrating kindness and love. There is also a presence, perhaps my own guides or a wise entity. I like the ketamine experience because I'm able to directly dialogue with this wise entity. The modafinil helps with this. It makes my mind become razor sharp and clear while navigating the K-hole realm. It also allows me to remember my entire experience, which helps with integration and journaling. Ketamine is known for helping with trauma, depression, and PTSD, and I can understand why. It's as if your body's limbic system or brainstem gets turned off and rebooted. These are the places in the brain that hold charges of extreme emotions associated with past traumas. It is the place of hypervigilance and triggering. When experiencing ketamine in this way, you realize what it's like to be at peace in your body, completely relaxed. Areas deep in your body that you did not even know were holding tension, even your organs, just let go. There is a stillness that is sublime. There is a certain hue of fun and humour. I began asking the wisdom within the realm to experience certain things. I thought, I want to experience divine motherly love. And in an instant, I was being cuddled, cooed, and hugged by thousands of doting and beautiful mothers. It was like being tuned into the bodies of thousands of little babies being hugged and kissed by adoring and smiling mothers. Little baby eyes locked in wonder, with mother's loving eyes times 1,000. I then thought, I want to experience puppy love. This is the kind of crush a young boy might experience towards his kind teacher or teenage babysitter. Still quite innocent, but there is a fascination with the female energy. Smile, bosom, laughter, sweet smells, etc. It is a pre-sexual attraction, but attraction nonetheless. So with this thought, I was blasted into the energetic field at a stadium concert between Taylor Swift and thousands of adoring fans. I realised that she represents an idealised youthful form to millions of adolescent and young women. This form is playful, fun, and expressive, unashamed and classically feminine. Taylor Swift is also teasingly erotic in a naive way, without the dark overtones of exploitation that cloud much of adult sexuality. It is beyond describing how absolutely fun it was to feel all this youthful and innocent feminine energy, synergizing in the energetic field. I was swimming in it. I was it. Then, my adult male brain kicked in, and I thought, I want to experience incredible sex. The best way to describe where I went next was a fabric of numerous intermingling male and female genitalia. Imagine having hundreds of simultaneous male and female orgasms, then resetting and having 100 more. The pleasure was very balanced, as if feeling the subtle differences of both genders. It was also balanced with the heart chakra. So it wasn't the mistaken ideal of sex with Fabio or a Playboy model. I asked for incredible, so that naturally includes the subtleties of both gendered climaxes, along with a deep heart connection. You would think I'd want to stay in this experience forever, but the next thought I had was that this is enough. I want to experience stillness. It's hard to believe, but what I experienced next was infinitely better than 100 simultaneous male-female orgasms. I met a guide, a mature woman yogi, meditating in full lotus. She asked me to face her and join her in meditation. You've released all your desire. Now feel what it is like to know stillness at the core of your being, she said. I was now in a desert-like area that was both simple and beautiful. I felt grounded into its dusty earth. I felt timeless. I felt safe. I had no negative feelings about myself or the universe. There was nothing here that I wanted to change. There was nothing I wanted to become. With her meditating across from me, I felt a deep loving connection. I was both alone in silence and deeply connected to this other being. I could have stayed here forever. I tried to hold on, but another being formed in front of me. A fat, bearded Indian man, laughing heartily. I represent the universe. I am a smirk, not a smile. Do you know the difference? He said. So much information was downloaded all at once. Yes, a smile signifies one pole of duality. Its genuine form is a beautiful expression of pleasure and happiness. A smile energizes both the one who is smiling and the others that witness it. The universe as such is not one polarity, therefore not aptly described wholly as a smile. A smirk is knowing that things are not as they seem. There is something else going on. A smirk says, I challenge you to figure out what's really going on, or what I am thinking. A smirk also says, don't take yourself so seriously. There is a joke, and it may be on you. The Indian man then said, once you figure it out, we will all laugh about it. Then, I felt the entire universe laughing. Not a mean laugh, but a heartful belly laugh, when one is let in on a practical joke played by dear friends. I knew the experience was coming to an end, and I asked to bring the wisdom learnt to be integrated with my human everyday self. I had a short visual of computer plugs that represented my brain being rearranged, and I was left with this parting thought. Everything I do becomes a gift to myself and others when I don't have any desire. In this sense, desire means that which gratifies only the self, or that which diverts attention from the present moment, or that which wants to change circumstances. In relation to earthly desires, like lust, wealth, fame, etc., I understood that I could appreciate the things desired without needing to consume or strive for them. After a few days of integration and journaling, it dawned on me that medicine showed me 3 developmental levels of yearning for love. First as an infant, then as a boy, then as an adult. This striving and reaching out for the comfort of love came from a place of emptiness, a feeling that I was fundamentally unloved. It was that misunderstanding that I needed to get love in one or more of its elusive forms. After all my desires for love were quelled, I was shown the gift of stillness. What it feels like to be whole just as you are, at peace in your own skin or soul. From this place of stillness, I became powerful. I realized how much creative life force I could wield from the place of stillness versus a place of desire. Wait, am I that which I desire? The universe is laughing a hearty belly laugh, and I'm now laughing with it. Journey into the Infinite, a ketamine trip report by Jesus Green, uploaded to Erowid on February 14th, 2010. It was coming to the end of a long day. Before this day, I'd only used ketamine a total of 4 times, each rather low doses, producing euphoric feelings and a bit of detachment from my body. These experiences were all very pleasant, and so I purchased quite a small amount of 0.5g to do a bit of experimentation. The night before I used around 0.05g, once again for the euphoric effects, but this day I was going to change things. There were quite a few bits and pieces that I simply cannot explain in words, and there are other pieces that have disappeared from my memory, but I wrote this account the best I could. When using ketamine, I use small lines, as it allows me to take very specific doses. Throughout the day I used 0.2g. This kept me feeling amazing all day, with some difficulty walking, and a tendency to speak my thoughts aloud. However, by the time it reached 10 PM, I was feeling quite sober, albeit very happy, and I still had 0.25g left. I started by taking one small line, which left me feeling nice, but wanting more. So right after it, I did another. Quickly I began to feel dizzy, and my typing skills started to deteriorate, but before I knew it I had done another 2 small lines. Eventually I gave in, and simply snorted the rest of what was left, until the wrap was left empty and bare. Within a minute or two it hit me hard, and I was really struggling to continue my conversations on MSN. I quickly closed my browser, and began to focus all my energy on trying to keep up meaningful conversations, as I could feel myself falling, and I knew the K-hole awaited me. Soon my typing started to turn to gibberish, and I knew I'd simply be bugging my friends if I continued to try and type, so I said goodbye and signed off. I could feel the music I was listening to wash over me in waves. It was an extremely pleasurable experience, but I was beginning to get scared. I'd never felt this detached from my body before in my life. What if I'm dying? I asked myself, and suddenly I felt extremely empty and terrified of what might happen. I knew I had to stop my music, so I quickly closed my music player and switched off my computer. I then proceeded to head to bed so that I could lay down for a while. After the struggle to reach my bed, in which I nearly fell over a few times, I felt a little calmer. Most of my body felt numb now, and I could only feel any of it if I moved. I signed back onto MSN with my mobile, as I felt like I might be able to communicate easier while lying down. But this was a mistake. I continued to say really random and strange things to my friends, as I would tell them what I was experiencing, so they got worried and I decided it was best to sign off again. I could feel my body being absorbed. I was being dragged down into some form of abyss. I tried to struggle, but eventually I gave in and let myself go. Once I was in the K-hole, everything lost its meaning. I was no longer a person, just an entity, and everything I saw was meaningless. Everything started to fade to black, and I knew then that I was dying. I didn't want to die though. I suddenly regretted taking a bigger dose than normal, as I thought I would never see my friends or family again, and that this was the end. There was a sort of click, and suddenly I could see the room again. It was lit with a strangely surreal white glow. I was experiencing every emotion at once, from pure happiness to extreme pain and terror. The strange thing was, the overall feeling was simply amazing, and even the bad feelings served only to make it better. I started to hear a subtle voice. It kept muttering things I couldn't quite make out. But then I realised what it was trying to say. It was saying this is heaven. Time then seemed to slow down to a halt, and it was like every experience I have ever had was relived. All my memories brought to the front of my mind and then tossed away again. I was experiencing everything and nothing at the same time. Soon the glow started to shift, and I began to look up at the ceiling, where the glow still remained. I had an intense feeling that this remaining glow was God, only it was no human, and it was no single entity. It was almost like God was an expression or feeling rather than a person. This part of my experience is the hardest to explain, but I felt as if I was being purified by this God. Suddenly I was on MSN again, reliving the conversation I had a few minutes ago, and once again signing off. I felt the experience of heaven once more, and then everything slowly but surely faded to black. The final part of my experience was just a total, utter darkness. It felt as though time had stopped completely, or rather, as if I'd left time behind, and travelled outside of everything for a while. This continued for what seemed like forever, until even this darkness faded out. I then woke up the next morning feeling extremely lightheaded and happy, like I would after smoking a couple of joints, only minus the paranoia and confusion. In conclusion, all I can say is that this was the most profound and interesting experience of my entire life, and I believe that ketamine is a very valuable research chemical, both scientifically and spiritually. I truly experienced infinity that night, and I would be very happy to relive the same experience, despite the terror I went through initially. Field of Consciousness, a ketamine trip report by Fair Nymph, uploaded to Erowid May 28, 2002. Dose: 45mg injected subcutaneously, ketamine taken from a bottle of Ketamine. Relevant info: I am sick, earache, sore throat, and a little tired. I've had one drink, screwdriver, approximately 30 minutes prior to injecting the ketamine, but I'm not feeling the alcohol much. Experience with ketamine: 3 times insufflated at doses of 30, 50 and 250mg, twice subcutaneously at doses of 25 and 50mg, once sublingually at 20mg, only one K-hole at 250mg insufflated. A great deal of experience with most other drugs and psychedelics. Setting: I'm alone in my room. I've just taken a shower and got into some fresh clean sheets. It is 2 AM. My mindset is pretty good. I'm thinking I will not go to school the next day because I need to rest and try and get over my cold. Duration of high: not known. My estimate was 35 to 40 minutes, though I think it seemed longer while I was experiencing it. I set up the needle and set it aside, and put away the rest of my gear. Put a trash can near my bed in case I feel the need to vomit, though I've never vomited or had nausea on ketamine. I get into bed and inject the ketamine slowly, allowing some of the solution to diffuse through before injecting more. It stings a little, but I've done this 3 times now, so it's not so bad. I don't feel anything after I finish, so I dispose of the needle, turn off the lights, and get under my covers. Over the course of a couple of minutes, I begin to feel some of the effects setting in. I begin to hear this subdued, mild buzzing sound, similar to what I heard while on 25mg of SC ketamine, or on nitrous. I feel the strange warmth of the body high, and I realise that I am no longer in complete control of my limbs. I have to concentrate to be aware of their existence. I look over to my alarm clock on the ground to see what time it is, and I realise that the power has gone out temporarily, or something really weird has happened, because my clock is no longer set, and the time, which says something like 12:08 or something, as the clock automatically resets to 12, is flashing. I find this really strange, because I clearly remember setting my alarm so that I would be able to get up in the morning if I felt better. Throughout the course of my trip, I look at this clock and think about how it could have possibly been unset. I'm definitely feeling the effects quite strongly now. I run my hands over my body and both my hands and body parts feel weird and disconnected. They don't feel like me. I have experienced this before with ketamine, and it was especially pronounced while having sex on Ket, but it still strikes me as very interesting. I realise that I have to really focus on the existence of my body and my physical state in order to be aware of them. Otherwise, the entirety of my energy and consciousness is mental. I feel like I'm on another plane. It feels similar to my time on 250mg insufflated, but I wonder how much my trip that time was affected by my very different setting, which is in a well-lit room with about 5 other people, most of them tripping as well. I think that being alone allows me to enter this different plane, or dimension, or whatever you want to call it, more fully. It's like I can focus entirely on my consciousness, and I don't have to divert any energy to social interaction. A few days ago, I had finished a book on SRV, Scientific Remote Viewing, and ET, Extraterrestrial Life. As I'm tripping, I think about these ETs, and I tell myself that possibly this trip may open my consciousness more to them, if they exist that is, of which I am not yet fully convinced. I feel a little afraid. For most of my life, the idea of aliens has terrified me more than anything else, perhaps except death. But I tell myself not to be afraid, that being afraid will only make things worse. This psychological sense of fear is accompanied by a tight feeling in my chest, similar to the feeling of a panic attack, though milder. I succeed in convincing myself to be calm, and for the most part unafraid. At this point, my awareness of my physical body has elapsed almost entirely. I do not move my body at all, not even my head. But I feel that even though I've limited my consciousness to the purely mental state, that I have expanded, or that somehow I have access to more of the mental state. I don't quite know how to describe this, but it's like normally my mind exists in a room, or perhaps a collection of rooms, and now my mind has been unleashed and placed in a wide open field expanding in all directions. This field of consciousness is dark, though I'm still not fully aware of its boundaries or its contents, but I am aware of its vastness and its infinity. I feel a little like I'm stumbling around in this FOC semi-blindly. At this point in the trip, my eyes are usually closed, though I open them periodically. I try to determine which way, eyes closed or eyes open, will allow me to see more. I use the term see very broadly in this context. Thus, sight refers not only to physical sight, but also mental, psychological, spiritual insight. Throughout my trip, I will return to this dilemma, eyes open or eyes closed. For about 65% of the time though, I decided to close my eyes, believing that this will allow me to explore more mentally. I consider this, the fact that there is more to explore without my body, without my eyes, just within my own mind and consciousness. A very fascinating concept. It's as if there is a completely different dimension, and possibly many different dimensions, which can only be accessed through the portal of the mind. I think back to the aliens and ETs. I'm very curious about them, and I consciously make an effort to sense their presence or somehow communicate with them. I have previously in my life, not while high, and most times during my early childhood, sensed the presence of other beings, even though I was physically alone, from what I could tell. This sense that I am not alone, and that I am sharing or somehow linking my consciousness with other beings, quite possibly ET, develops during this trip. But I can only barely sense this presence. It is as if the connection between my consciousness and these other beings is a bad line, or there is a lot of static or something like that. I'm aware of them, but only very vaguely, and though I try to make the connection more clear or obvious, I fail. Throughout the trip, this connection fades in and out, and I never actually feel like I get a clear line. I will note here that the trip seems to last for a while. While I am in it, there is this definite time dilation, but I do not find it disturbing or unsettling, as I often do with other psychedelics. My thoughts turn to death, which is somewhat a common concept for me when I trip, and a concept that I've thought about with previous ketamine use. When I'm sober, thinking about death typically results in a mild panic attack, extreme psychological terror, hyperventilation, this tight feeling in my chest, heart pounding, etc. This type of reaction was especially pronounced when I was younger. When I'm tripping, either on ketamine but also on acid or shrooms, I tend to be able to think about death a lot more calmly and with greater perspective. This is also the case right now. I still feel some sadness or fear at the thought of no longer existing as Julia, as me, as an individual, but I feel removed and detached from these emotions, and I feel a sense of acceptance that whatever comes after death will be a valid state of consciousness and existence, in its own way. I understand this intuitively, but having it presented to me again consciously or semi-consciously is oddly comforting. I begin to feel as if I am emerging from my deeply introspective state. I move my arms and legs around a bit, and think that if I really needed to, I could get up and walk a short distance, and I find this thought comforting. I'm gaining awareness of my body again, and feel some sadness that I'm leaving the field of consciousness, although I feel somewhat connected to it still. A few minutes later, I almost abruptly emerge from the field of consciousness and feel about 80% sober. I'm slightly surprised by this, but not terribly, as I have heard that the effects wear off quite quickly. Again, I feel this sadness and a desire to return to the FOC. I think to myself, on a more practical level, wow, I like this drug. Wow, I can see how this drug can be addictive. Even while I was in this FOC, I wanted to keep exploring. I wanted to shed more light on the dark expanses. I feel as if I am returning to a much more limited existence and state of consciousness. I feel that I haven't learned or experienced enough, and I want to go back to that place, that FOC, and experience more. I tell myself that this drug can be a great tool, but I need to use it wisely and cautiously. I then roll over onto my side, and tired from my day and journey, I quickly fall asleep. K-hole in an abandoned house. Emptiness. A ketamine trip report, uploaded to Shroomery the 31st of August 2013. About 2 months ago, I decided to do some ketamine with some friends who have never done it before. I personally am experienced with ketamine, MXE, DXM, salvia, etc. But one of my friends, who was on about 50 milligrams, was not experienced in the slightest. I showed up to my friend's apartment and it was completely empty, and I remembered that he was moving, but still had keys. So while he was over, he decided that it would be better to trip inside his old, dark, empty apartment. I thought this idea was dumb, since we could have just done it anywhere else. Around 11, I get there, and they had already taken a few bumps, and my experienced friend took 60 milligrams, and the others took around 50. The inexperienced friend I'll call N. And when I got there, he looked at me and seemed very angsty and tripping himself out. I gave him some money, and I got 150 milligrams and cut up about 80 milligrams to rail. All the while I was cutting the lines and snorting them, I was listening to a very weird set of songs, which every single one of them brought up a very distinct emotion and mood from it. It almost felt entirely abstract, and I don't feel like putting it in words, since then I would have to explain the story of my life. I finished smoking bowls of Luke Skywalker OG and was extremely high and feeling the effects of the K like anesthesia, so I laid down. It was 11:30 now, and I was going in and out of reality. Sort of not a full-blown K-hole, but completely dissociated. From that night, I remember the first thing that I noticed in my closed-eye visuals are what I usually saw, nothing special. So I opened my eyes to see my friends cutting lines, and I took another smaller one, and then leaned against the wall, and realised that my friend N didn't exactly know what they were getting into. And around that time, the other friends started talking about money, dealing drugs, work, the potency of K and how it's not to be messed with, and other shit like when they want to go home and whatnot. I then just felt as if the voices that were coming from them were slowing down and becoming unclear, and then I fell into a hole. Time now is completely meaningless, and I'm guessing that it was probably around 12, but I can't say for sure. I drift away, and I can feel my soul sort of just stretching and pulling away from my body, and my brain warping and flowing in correlation with the visuals. I'd see galaxies appear from the nothing, and magnificent mind-bending visuals. I kept remembering things that happened in my life, a bit like you would on MXE, and as my thoughts began to come back, I slowly came out of the hole. When I opened my eyes, I see how my friend N seemed to be worrying about the trip he was on, and worrying about life and problems he's been going through, and I could tell because every now and then he'd be mentioning them. For whatever reason, I kept feeling like I needed to say things to them to sort of help out, and whenever it came out, it was just total jarble, like something that's been distorted to the point where it's not even recognisable. I was able to pick up that I was tripping them out, and I would try to keep my thoughts to myself, but I simply couldn't. I drifted off again, and saw what seemed to be my skull being viewed from inside my brain. Inside it was like being inside a cold damp room that was huge and open, like a church or dome. I was trapped inside my body, which felt like a cold, empty shell, and I felt as if being trapped until I died, and then I could finally be released and sent into the next realm. I tried telling my friend that nothing exists, and that everything is just your perception playing tricks on you. I tried to explain everything to him about different dimensions and how they exist here and now, but there's no way a human could perceive it, so it just passes by, leaving us unaffected. I continued my lecture, drooling and rambling on about how everything is fake and that things like colour, pain, sound or touch wouldn't exist if there's no way to detect it. I went in way more detail than I should have, and I know now how weird it must have been to be tripping on K for the first time and having me say all this shit. Like, it gets overwhelming and freaky to people, especially if they're already beginning to have a bad trip. I began to pick up stress from the other people and just sort of felt bad. Not depressed or sick or angry, I just felt cold and empty, so I decided to smoke some more weed. Every hit I took, I would have the bong milked in a matter of seconds, and I wouldn't feel the smoke whatsoever until I inhaled a massive hit of yellow smoke that just felt as if it was clogging my lungs with sludge. I'd heave and cough and spit, and still needed to smoke, and the weed sent me back, intensifying the trip. I knew now that I was annoying N, so I meditated for a while, and I finally awakened when I heard my friend talking about leaving and time and shit that's just stressing them out in general. When I heard the word time, I saw businessmen with no expression on their faces appear in my head, and I saw them looking over rows of clocks and time charts, and industrial-looking elves which turned its gears. I got up fast, looked my friend in the eyes and said, "Time is capitalist," and then stopped talking since I felt as if I was making him have a bad trip again. This annoyed him, and he was saying all this shit about me not knowing about life and all this stuff, and we weren't arguing, but we sort of were, except that we both had different beliefs and interpretations of whatever was said. We all realised that we'd had about enough of this dark, smoke-filled apartment, so we packed up our things and decided to go on a sobering up walk. But before we left, I wandered about the room, disgusted with myself since I was covered in spit. I washed my face in the sink for a good 10 minutes while my experienced friend approaches me saying in a scraggling, "I just railed another 60 milligram," which shocked me since shit just seemed so crazy at the moment, since I could hear my friend N repeating he wanted it to end, and being comforted while me and the other guy were just tripping balls trying to be serious about the situation, but we were just simply on another level. On the walk, we stumbled around the midnight streets, and I felt as if I never wanted to go back inside. The world was changing from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional, and it reminded me of old video game graphics I used to play on the PS1. The fresh air, nature, euphoria and delirium were great, except I realised it wasn't very good to be out in public with someone that could start tripping out, so we all decided to go inside, and then have the person no longer tripping drive us home. I didn't talk much about the trip with my friend N, but I realised he was unprepared, and money problems and memories combined with my overwhelming speeches made it a bad experience for him. He explained his experiences on it to me, and I realised that ketamine is not for everyone, but it's still one of my favourite drugs. Face to Face with My Soul, a ketamine trip report by Alanster Monster, posted to earwid.org July 14, 2002. After reading various experience reports of ketamine, it seems to me that many people are completely unaware of what it is exactly that they are dealing with, as was I before my first experience of this incredibly powerful drug. This is not a report on a single experience, rather my complete experience of ketamine from beginning to end. I first learnt of this substance after reading a paper on how a near-death experience could be reached via ketamine. This was about 5 years ago in high school. Fascinated, I continued research on this and eventually came to the conclusion that I wanted to try it. My first problem would be actually obtaining ketamine in pure form. I wasn't about to go looking for some crap off the street. Luckily enough, I discovered it was sold in veterinary clinics in Mexico over the counter, and happened to live in a city right on the US-Mexican border. Lucky me. So, I was off to Mexico, a trip I make often in search of veterinarians. After trying a few different clinics, which all offered it at varying prices, $60 at one place, ouch, I settled on a place that charged $30 for a 10cc vial, so I bought one with no problem and went straight home. Now, I feel the need to stress that what I did was very, very stupid. I had no idea what I was doing or how to prepare for this, and I recommend that anyone thinking of doing this do your research, and if at all possible, have a personal experience of ketamine around, and a sitter. Ketamine is not something to mess around with. Anyway, when I got home, I continued to gently boil my ketamine until I got a nice white crystallised powder. Easier than I thought, although I advise on using a pot with a non-stick surface, it helps. I scraped it up and put it in a baggie, and that was that. I gathered up 3 willing friends and we went to an isolated area of the city where we each proceeded to snort about 200 milligrams each. I had previous experiences with cocaine, so this didn't seem like much at all. Big mistake. We were all sitting in my car, and about 1.5 to 2 minutes later, it hit hard. It took about 2 minutes to completely take over, and all hell broke loose. I started trying to talk to my sweater, which looked like a face, and then the car started moving, or at least I thought it was. Don't get me wrong, this wasn't confusion or anything. For all my mind and body knew, this car was moving, and I had to keep it from crashing. Needless to say, this was a traumatic experience for everyone. There was not much there in content, however. I had never felt anything like that before, nor thought it was even possible. Well, none of my friends ever wanted to do that again, and I wasn't sure I wanted to either. But nevertheless, I went back and got another vial from the same vet about 2 weeks later. This time, I decided that I would stay home for this experience and lay in my bed, which turned out to be much better. Being stubborn, I repeated the same dosage and snorted it in much smaller, multiple lines this time. It burns pretty bad if you take big lines. I had the lights off with just a strong candle burning and Pink Floyd playing slightly in the background. This time, it was completely different. I got the first of what would be my typical experience. As laid back in my bed, I focused on allowing whatever happens to take its course and not try to fight it. When it first comes on, about 1 to 2 minutes after snorting, it's like your mind starts tuning into a different frequency than normal. First, I hear sounds that I don't think are imagined, but not normally picked up by our ears, kind of like the static on the radio with a quick rattling sound. Then, I started getting sucked into this new world, which exists simultaneously with this world but on another plane. While on ketamine, I would completely forget who I was, or rather that I even existed. It was a complete separation from my body, and I only existed as the mind, without a physical form. Reality, as I knew it, seemed like just a faded dream or memory, and all aspects of that reality were completely absurd to me. The idea of driving a car didn't make sense, or money or family and many other everyday things. Not only are these things going on in my head, but I can see everything I think with such realism that it becomes my new reality. I continued using ketamine to a seriously dangerous level, at least 3 times a week and even several times in one day. This was for a period of about 6 to 7 months. I don't believe that ketamine is physically addictive, but I strongly believe that it is psychologically addictive, for some. I began to have trouble making sense of my reality as I knew it. Strong feelings of confusion about how things are what they are and why they are persisted day after day. Not only was I questioning my reality, but I was questioning my own existence. The reality created by ketamine was so real that it made me doubt my other reality. I continually returned to ketamine in the search for answers. But now, my tolerance was growing very strongly throughout this time, until I was taking about 500 milligrams every instance. The last time I did it was the single most difficult experience I've ever endured. I was at the peak of my confusion of realities, and one night I did a very small dose for me at the time of 200 milligrams. I had more, but was saving that for the next day. I wasn't even supposed to do it this time, but I couldn't wait. As I suspected, it wasn't enough to get me to the K-hole, and I'm sceptical whether many people who claim to have been there actually have. I think the term K-hole is used too loosely. But it was enough to get me really disoriented and upset. It was in this state that I decided that this wasn't the reality I wanted to exist in. I wanted to exist in the ketamine reality, which I thought was the true reality. So I went into my stash and pulled out all of my ketamine, 1000 milligrams. I thought that if I took all of it, I would stay in my other reality forever, and that's what I wanted. I knew I wouldn't be able to snort it all, so I mixed half with a cup of orange juice and proceeded to snort the other 500 milligrams. I somehow made it to my bed, and what happened next was beyond imagination. I went deeper into the K-hole than I had ever been. This time, I actually got what had initially attracted me to the drug. I died. Maybe this wouldn't be considered a near-death experience, rather a death experience, because as far as my mind was concerned, I was well and truly dead. I saw my mum crying over my body as I was lifted up over it, and then suddenly I was pulled down at an incredible speed for what seemed like an eternity, literally. I ended up in what I first thought was hell. I was being pulled at my feet, laying down by this demon-like creature floating through strange caverns that had no floor and no ceiling, just eternity, towards what I thought was the devil. All around me were other beings pulled just like me. I was scared, but not scared at the time. When I got to where I was going, I was confronted by an entity. Not the devil, I didn't know who it was. I looked into this massive light and energy, and I realised it was me. I was looking at my soul. Nothing told me, I just knew. I stood in awe, and a million realisations came to me at once, but too fast to process. The one realisation that was completely clear to me though, was that I wasn't in a different reality at all. I was inside myself. Not my physical self, but in my subconscious mind, yet I was conscious at the very same time. A little after that, I slipped back into reality, and it took me about 30 minutes to look at the clock and be able to read the time. It was 3:35 AM. I started at 11 PM and took the large dose at about 11:30, so I estimated I was gone for about 3.5 hours. This was much longer than I'd ever been out. Usually it was about 30 to 45 minutes. That was the last time I took ketamine. It's been almost 4 years now. I feel that I learnt what I had to about myself and no longer saw a need to return. The moral of the story? Ketamine cannot be taken with the intention of just getting fucked up, or the whole content or meaning behind the experience will be lost. The ketamine experience is best left to those wishing to see themselves in the world from a completely different perspective. It is not for the weak-minded. There was much that I learned, and I feel that it's positively influenced my life and the way I look at everything. But be careful. It can change the way you look at the entire concept of existence, so be sure that you are ready for that. Strings and Things. A ketamine trip report by Silo707. Uploaded to earwid.org January 21st, 2007. Setting: bedroom, 6 AM. Prelude. I've only been using ketamine on an occasional, sometimes often basis for a little over a year now as of this writing. I've always enjoyed it, but did not get a true taste of a strong K-hole experience until recently. Its dark and foreboding side is alluring to me, and I view it as the rebel drug of the psychedelic world. The outcast. Too strange even for the other chemicals to hang around it. My favourite time to slip into a K-hole is after a long night of activity on MDMA, preferably while still coming down, though not necessary. I feel it brings a deeper side to the drug and enhances my trip quite a bit. This report is about one of those times, my most recent one, and it was so powerful that I think it would be interesting to write it in a form which might emulate the way I was thinking while under the influence, and also in present tense. I've been waiting a couple weeks, collecting my thoughts on what exactly happened during this 2 to 3 hour K-hole, but I think I have it figured out as much as possible, which is not very much at all. Note, no tolerance at this time. Blast off. A warm sun is rising over the eastern horizon through my translucent blinds, and I'm receiving the perfect temperature and light within the room. I'm physically tired from the night before, but my brain is ready for more action. I dig 300 milligrams worth of ketamine out of my bag, weighed up, onto a tiny metal spoon and take it in consecutive bumps in a swift manner. Zoop. Ah, there's that taste. I'm so used to the slight sting of the drug that it doesn't bother me much at all anymore. If you've never tasted ketamine before, it tastes exactly how I'd think it should. A slight chemical wave runs through my nose and down my mouth, sending signals to the rest of my body in a fashion that is clearly communicating, here we go again. I lay back on my bed in a perfect symmetrical position as I always do and begin to ascend. The feelings seem to be coming on strong and I await the peak with open arms. Part 1. Escape from the Motherland. Green walls and a tilted ceiling fan are visible. My physical body must still be too aware of my bedroom. I need to concentrate on my departure. Cosmic particles are running up through my spine, bypassing my neck and colliding with my brain at a quickened rate. Each successive particle is pushing me slowly and slowly upward in an erratic fashion. I'm in an elevator riding to the summit of the universe, yet stopping at every floor on the way up. Not surprisingly, only my mind and my sense of breath are being elevated, and have left the rest of my body from the chest down back at the home base. Oh well, I don't need any of that stuff anyway. If we were all simply flying brains in a four-dimensional universe, as I seem to have just become, there would be much less problems in the world anyway. I am now free. My first clue is the fact that I feel my eyes halfway open, yet I am no longer in that small cubed room within another small cube. I see a landscape of pure white. Checkered patterns slowly make their way across the mental world in my head, my imagery, and I am attempting to chase them down to find out where they are going. I'm successful in chasing these flying entities, but a problem arises when I realise with every one I catch, another infinite number of them spawn. Involuntarily, I seem to be analysing how long it will take to catch an infinite number of these, and before I came up with an answer, I am hit with a split second of thoughts that have been blasted to me in a capsule from the reality I had come from. Flash of thought. You're on a drug. You need to make sure to breathe, because the physical body that is allowing you to retain this mind state has sent an alert to this dimension, demanding more attention to its processes. For that brief moment, I was back in my body. I calmed my breathing down and reminded myself that ketamine is one of the safest substances there is. Assured, I was immediately blown back into the cosmos, to a level never having been reached in this way before. Part 2. Through the spiralling wormhole. I've just flown past our dimension of time and space. I am flying forward in an erratic yet peaceful spiral direction, not only in my mind, but my body as well. The speed is picking up, and I feel my mind communicating with my hands, who have remained in the first dimension with the rest of humanity, telling them to clench the bed and hold on for life. I've just flown through the second dimension, into the third, into the fourth. My speed is maxed out, far beyond the standards of terminal velocity, and I continue in the form of a particle through each successive dimension. While I am still aware of the amount of planes of time and space I am passing through, the travel becomes smooth and I am passing through each dimension at a constant rate. Everything is flowing and allowing my specific particle to pass as I reach levels deeper into the cosmos. I am in Dimension 10, and I feel my speed slowing at a rapid pace. The swirls have become stagnant, and are inspecting me as I pass peacefully through the only territory they have ever known. I pass through the last gate, the end of the line. I'm in Dimension 11, and this seems to have been my destination all along. I come to the realisation that only a few entities are ever allowed this deep, and I must not take my presence here for granted. I'm floating in a void, many shapes and scenes unfolding in front of me, all of them alien, non-realistic in regards to the physics and chemical makeup of the known universe. I float around for what seems to be quite some time. I'm soaking in everything, and I'm not forcing my own control within this void at all. Then, something happens. The 11th dimension has imploded into itself. I watched every other entity within this realm begin to connect to one another, to become one. They are acting in this manner at a very fast rate, and I know my time to connect with them draws near. I wait until an appropriate time to join them arises, and then I open my arms and succumb to the growing web of matter. With no delay or transition, I become one. I am the singularity. All of us entities have finished connecting with each other and begin to contract into a single point in reality, or non-reality. We surpass the form of a point and become a presence. Note, this is absolutely the most intense and unreal mind state I have ever achieved, with the exception of 5-MeO-DMT, which is only slightly ahead. As this singularity, I am in the centre of everything that is known. Part 3. The other superstring theory. I am connected to every part of every universe and dimension that I have just traversed. Through a set of invisible strings, which connect every piece of matter ever conceived to one another, I can focus on any area of the cosmos that I wish. I can see the place that I originated, the beautiful and naturally flawless body in space that I came from, Earth. I see its inhabitants living their lives. I see the powerful energy that is attempting to sustain these inhabitants, and I see the people who are truly important to me as alive and happy. I connect my thoughts through these various strings, whose endpoints are residing in the alternate multiple dimensions I had briefly visited, and I am struck with a sense of awe at how unique and different each one is from the next. Each has their own physical properties, and types of beings that live their existence within them. The strings have now hidden themselves from me, and I am thankful for them having been revealed, as it has given me more awareness of the fact that everything in the universe might truly be connected to one another. I have descended in my mind state, but only slightly. Part 4. Anti-Ascension. I'm slowly gaining awareness of myself being placed back into my physical body. It's a strange feeling, and my eyes are half open, yet I still do not fully understand my location. My mind is spiralling back from the alternate realities I'd faced, and slowly, memory of what the real world is slowly comes back to me. A blast of introspection hits me like a train, and I see myself and everything that I believe in, compressed into one small space that is my mind. My entire memory and persona is reassembling itself, and the love for what I have in this world feels stronger and more vibrant within me. As I slowly open my eyes, I look at the corners of my ceiling, which seems to stretch for miles away. There also seems to be a thin layer of darkened matter spread throughout the room, which seemed to make my surroundings darker than I believed them to be in reality. I noted this was nothing new, and ketamine usually did, in fact, make my vision seem darker in an indoor environment. I dismissed my surroundings once again, and closing my eyes, hoped to squeeze every last feeling out of the mind state that I have achieved. My internal vision is one of a vast expanse of empty space, with a few thoughts that I can access if I choose to, who are visibly floating within. I decide to focus on reaching a clear, meditative mind state, and do not think in detail about any sort of idea. My mind feels open and relaxed, and I concentrate on disregarding my ego as much as possible, attempting to study my situation from an overall perspective. Without relating any of my own experiences to them, I begin thinking about the aspects of life that are most important to one's existence. I think of friends, of family, of choosing a career with which I can use my skills and traits successfully, and I think of attempting to remain as morally good of a person as I can during this lifetime. I feel the effects of the ketamine gradually fade into the recesses of my mind. I'm in a very positive mood, having felt cleansed of all the stress I had accumulated during the last few weeks, and I do not feel tired or lazy at all. I'm ready to get up and go do something productive, while contemplating the perspectives of myself that the substance has just allowed me to see. I smile in contentment, and without hesitation, pull myself off my bed, put on some warmer clothes, and head out of the house. What does it feel like to die? A ketamine trip report by Words of Truth. Posted to earwid.org, October 27th, 2010. A place to live unharmed by death does not exist. Not in space, not in the sea, nor if you stay in the midst of mountains. Buddha. Buddha says that a healthy contemplation of death throughout your lifetime helps to counteract the misguided notion that life is permanent. Yet ironically, we who live in the West are rarely privy to the one phenomenon that will certainly come to us all. Nothing in life is certain, except that one day, life as we know it will be no longer. Death is hidden away, swept under the carpet, kept behind closed doors. And the reasons for this are as numerous as they are varied. Death is private, it is sad, it forces us to confront our mortality, to take a long hard look at our life, and to decide whether or not we are satisfied that we have put our time on earth to good use. Did I make a difference? Has my life amounted to anything? Did I learn whatever it is I was put on earth to learn? These are all questions that resonate amongst all of us as members of the human race, regardless of our culture, our nationality, or our religion. But if death is hidden away from us, and if the culture we are brought up in eschews the idea of contemplating death, considers it to be morbid and unnatural, then how are we ever to understand what death is, what death feels like? Well, 2 years ago, I experienced death, and the experience was so enormous, so profound, that the memory I have of it has been seared into my innermost being and will remain with me until the day I experience it again in earnest. For me, death was the most incredible, breathtaking, terrifying, eye-opening, and deeply, deeply spiritual experience I've ever had. It quite literally brought me to my knees. It unleashed an inhuman scream, a scream that rippled across the universe. It was the scream of a being experiencing his true nature for the first time. My near-death experience occurred 2 years ago, and although I've only just now plucked up the motivation to write about it, Not one day has gone by when I haven't thought of it and revisited the place I was transported to. The realm of the eternal, the divine source. My story is by no means exceptional. There were no apparitions of the Virgin Mary, no tunnel of light, nor life review. For me, death was quite simply an unveiling of reality, samsara, and a complete and utter shattering of my ego or self. I've told the story of what happened to me to many people, but this is the first time I've ever tried to put this ineffable experience into some kind of narrative. I spent a lot of time in nightclubs as a gay Australian male, and with that territory, I inevitably came to the temptation of recreational drugs. A temptation I'm not exactly thrilled to admit that I gave into. I was never a big drug user, to be fair, but over the course of approximately 10 years, I did experiment quite heavily with drugs. And to make matters worse, I'm very much an all-or-nothing type of person. So when I did venture down that path, it wasn't just a little way, it was as far as I could push myself. The week before my 27th birthday, I went out with my boyfriend at the time to the same nightclub I'd been going to for the last 10 years. And like many a night, we decided to drop ecstasy. Nothing exciting. It wasn't very good, and I remember being a little dismayed that I hadn't had the euphoric night I'd been craving. It was then I decided to go in search of some ketamine. Ketamine was not a drug I knew an awful lot about. I'd tried it a few times in small doses and had quite had good experiences on it. Had I known then what I know now about what larger quantities of the drug are capable of doing, I think I would have run 10 miles in the opposite direction before putting the chemical up my nose. Needless to say, I was handed some very strong ket and warned to only take a small amount. Advice I ignored. I snorted a very, very large line of very pure ketamine, with the ensuing result being the story I'm now about to tell, and the catalyst for my creating this entire blog. The ensuing result was that I experienced death. No ifs, no buts, no maybes about it. I will borrow the following text detailing what a schizophrenic break feels like, a scientific explanation for what occurs when the ego collapses. To produce a schizophrenic break, you need to collapse the ego, preferably as rapidly as possible. There are different ways of defining the ego, but I define them thusly. The ego is a structure of the personality that is made up of what we believe to be true about ourselves, others, the world around us, as well as our place in it. We form these beliefs as based on our relationships, as well as our experiences, the roles we play, and the activities we engage in. All of these combined create our ego, which is, for most of us, our sense of who we are. Please note that I have rewritten the following account, incorporating some extracts from the Spiritual Emergency blog, which I think puts my experience into words better than I could have myself. The overall experience is described as falling into a kind of abyss of isolation. This comes about because there is no such discrepancy between the subjective inner world that one has been swept into and the mundane everyday world outside. It's like falling into a death, not only a death state, but also a death space, the afterlife, the realm of the ancestors, the land of the dead, the spirit world. The common experience here is for the person to look about and think that half the people around him are dead too. While in this condition, it's very hard for one to tell if one is really alive or not. For me, it was as though I'd somehow managed to tear through the fabric of reality and to step behind the scenes of the world. Everything moved in slow motion in an endless cycle. I remember being overwhelmed at the very first sight of seeing the universe endlessly revolving in upon itself, as it had done for eons, and as it would continue to do for eternity. The universe is cyclical, a perfect circle. It had no beginning, and it'll have no end. Right away at the beginning, the death experience is accompanied by the feeling that you've gone back to the beginning of time. This involves a regression, a return to the state of infancy in one's personal life history. But hand in hand with this is the feeling of slipping back into the world of the primordial parents, into a Garden of Eden of sorts. For example, it's a very common experience to feel one is the child of Adam and Eve, say, at the beginning of time. This is very symbolic, obviously. It's pretty much a representation of the psyche at the start of one's individual career after birth. I remember distinctly having memories of Adam and Eve and the other narratives I've read about in the Bible. Words and phrases would rise in my mind, as though the entire experience was being narrated to me by some divine voice. Or perhaps it was just my own voice. The voice of the eternal I, that had always been there underneath the self, but had been drowned out by the incessant chatter of the mind. The phrase, "that's life," passed through my mind again and again, as though I was realising for the first time what life actually was. I remember seeing language as an entity unto itself, seeing the spirit of language. It is alive, and it sustains this life as we transmit it from generation to generation. I remember seeing all the meaning bundled up in a word like love, and feeling it with the same intensity, as if for that split second the voices of every single human being who had ever uttered it were coursing through my mind. I remember the phrase, "the game of life," passing through my stream of consciousness, and laughing as I saw for the first time the mechanics of this game unfolding before my eyes. I remember repeating a word over and over in my head, but it was not an English word, and to this day I don't know how to write it or what language it even is. I do, however, know what the word means. The word being spoken to me from the innermost depths of my soul was my name. Not the name I've been given in this lifetime, but my eternal name. The name I remembered at the point of all my previous deaths, and the name I will continue to remember for as many lives as I am forced to wander through samsaric existence. I saw all the people in my life as though they were characters in my story. Some of them good, some of them malevolent, but all of them were there for a purpose, to teach me something about myself, to allow me to grow as a spirit. It was as though we were all intertwined in a great eternal narrative, and that each of us in our various lives play a role in order for us to grow. Suddenly, it was as though everybody in the room turned to face me, and I felt all of the cells in my body tremble. The thought passed through my consciousness. I'm about to die. I know what's going to happen now. This moment is about to be the moment of my very death. I felt all the people in the room turn in slow motion to look at me, as though something profound was about to happen. Again, there was a primordial word for it that I heard from someone in the room. He's about to go through his... Then the primordial word for death was uttered. Suddenly, it was as though all the cells in my body turned to water, and I quite literally felt myself collapse into the ground, back into the very universe from which I first sprung. I let out a cry, an inhuman scream from the very depths of my soul. It is a sound I never realised I could make. A sound that my friends told me later literally stopped every person in the club in their tracks, and caused them to look over to where I'd collapsed. As I collapsed into the ground, I was screaming at the top of my lungs a word for my name, as though this unearthly scream of my primordial name could somehow force me to remember who I was and where I had come from. My friends picked me up, and it was as though somehow all the cells in my body reformed, and I began to come out the other side. It was as though for one brief instant, instead of cycling in upon itself, the universe passed one cycle through my body. As I got up, I could see my two close friends comforting me. "See, you're gonna be okay, it's alright. You're gonna be okay because death is not the end. It's just the end of one cycle and the beginning of another." All kinds of imagery comes tumbling across the field of awareness. It's like the mythological image in a perfect stained glass window being smashed, and all the bits and pieces being scattered. The effect is very colourful, but it's very hard to discern how the pieces belong to each other. Any attempt to make sense of it is an exercise in abstraction from the actual experience. The important thing here is to find a process running through it all. I'm writing this because I'm sure if you are reading this you have perhaps gone through a profound spiritual transformation yourself, or are looking at taking ketamine to do so. A word of warning, however. Whilst I don't regret what happened to me, I've spent the last 6 months on antidepressants to control the anxiety that developed. I've begun seeing a therapist to help me through this spiritual emergence, and I've now become a practicing Buddhist. I was an atheist before, so as you can imagine, that's a pretty big spiritual jump to make. I am happy to talk with people who have been through a similar experience. A New Heaven. A Ketamine and 1P-LSD trip report by Modern Jesus. Posted to earwid.org, September 30th, 2016. Some background. I've done practically every substance you can imagine, ranging from small to heavy doses throughout my life, from many different types of psychedelics, stimulants, and sedatives. I'm a veteran. I should also note that I am what is commonly considered to be clairvoyant, with background in occult practices. Before I started my workday, I'd taken a quarter tab of 1P-LSD, 25 micrograms, as I typically do almost every other day for energy, focus, mood, etc. There was nothing out of the ordinary about my day, and I was having an awesome day in fact, and was in a great mood. At T+8 hours, I got home from work and felt an unusual urge to dive into a K-hole, so I followed by gut and proceeded to prepare my shots. I started this experience the same way I always do. I went into my temple, meditation room, and I placed the syringes before Ganesh's shrine to be blessed. I asked for my guides to keep me safe during this journey, and asked for myself to be placed in a positive timeline. I bow, thank the gods, and then proceeded to go to my bedroom and set up my speakers, blindfold, rubbing alcohol, etc. Now I'm all set. Before I lie down, I try something different this time. I speak to the universe. It is my intention to be attuned and reconnected back to my memory bank in the Akashic records through my being, and I ask to be flooded with the highest amount of information I can handle at this time. During this process, it is my will to connect with my higher self, and I ask him to orchestrate this for me. May the energy flow for as long as it's needed. Thank you. This intent was the only thing I had done differently this time around. T+9 hours. I lie down, put on my usual ketamine playlist, Merlin's Magic, Healing Harmonies, you can find it on YouTube. I vaporize a bowl and bless it with my intentions. I found through repeated experiences and experiments that getting stoned beforehand intensifies the whole. I then proceed to inject 150 milligrams of ketamine IM into my thigh, followed by 70 milligrams intranasal. I put my blindfold on, get comfortable, and prepare to blast out. As the effects start to come on, with the typical gradual dissociation and detachment, frequency increases, as well as a high-pitched ringing, and a feeling that warm and fuzzy dissociative blanket covering me. Everything began to get much more serious and intense, and I knew quite quickly that this experience was going to be much, much different than anything else I've ever gone through before. Normally, when I enter the K-hole, the typical experience consists of something that is comparable to an immersive VR cyberpunk lucid dream, where I fly around through familiar subconscious matrix memories, and end up forgetting the vast majority of what I experience, due to the memory creating part of the brain being switched off. Extreme time dilation is something typical, and normally I come out of the experience dazed for a few hours. I can usually expect a good memory defrag, and I always use the experience to tweak internal programs and beliefs while I'm in the astral. However, during this experience, I was propelled into the highest levels of supposed memory that I've never gone into before, and it was much more colourful, vivid, and realistic than any of my typical experiences. Time was extremely dilated, much more so than normal, and the entire experience felt like it could have lasted several days. However, as usual, I only remember fragments I was able to hold on to. Time meant nothing. I flew through infinite layers of new and vivid landscapes, and I even remember seeing different versions of myself existing in different timelines, and choosing the timeline I was going to stick with. I remember vividly being in and seeing a type of psychedelic soul processing facility. For a period of time, I was convinced that I had accidentally killed myself, and that I was never coming back. Although, I made peace with this. I felt as if I had opened up or attuned to some type of portal system. I was presented with the choice to live or die, and I remember making the conscious choice to keep on living. So what happened next is even more hazy. I vividly remember being engulfed in a type of blue energy field, and being surrounded by many beings. I remember seeing many blue orbs, and I distinctly remember accepting a request and merging my being with another entity. I also remember different unique melodies playing during my playlist that I know that I've never heard before. The memory of the rest of my experience is foggy, but it consisted of flying through many novel and immersive landscapes. until I reached a point of being back in my body about an hour and a half later. T plus 10 hours and 30 minutes. I came out of this experience feeling absolutely ecstatic, filled with new and empowered energy. I'm now able to see many new possible timelines that I wasn't able to see before. However, I felt different. I felt amazing. But I also felt like I wasn't alone with myself. I stretched and had a shower while listening to music. I felt the urge to ask, who else is residing in my body? What immediately came out of my mouth with a strong tone was Ishtar. I then proceed to laugh hysterically and have a conversation with this being. The details of this conversation I cannot remember, unfortunately. The rest of the experience is negligible, but I'm left with new perspective, reassurance, and a new lust for life. Speculation. Intuitively, I feel that it's possible that the heavens, the astral, have transformed, and there is a distinct newness to the territory. This may be the long prophesied time of the new heaven and new earth, now being manifest. I also feel that it's possible that I have experienced what is commonly referred to as a walk-in experience with another entity or spirit, with this being that called itself Ishtar. Since this experience, I feel as though I've acquired a type of expansion pack to my being. Perhaps I made a soul contract with another being, although I can only speculate. I feel it's likely that when a person opens themselves up to the astral realms, that they open themselves up to the possibility of unexpectedly encountering trans-dimensional beings who may or may not have their best intentions at heart. I strongly advise asking for spiritual protection and having intentional direction during an experience like this. Now, I've gone through 100+ K-hole experiences in my life, with and without other psychedelics in my system, so I know what to expect normally. I've even gone into the K-hole while being on much higher doses of acid and even 2CB before, but never in my life have I ever experienced anything like this. I'm very familiar with the typical terrain of the astral, but this was very different. This experience report pales in comparison to the actual experience itself, and is an overall poor rendition of the scope and magnificence of what was experienced. But alas, this is the best of what I was able to remember and structure into words. With ketamine in higher doses, it's practically impossible to bring anything back, so to speak. Ketamine is one hell of a drug. Treat this sacrament with the respect that it deserves, and please, journey safe. K-hole trip report of 250 milligrams of ketamine posted to the Psychonaut subreddit by an unknown user 1 year ago. This happened about a year ago. I'm sitting on the edge of my bed with very dim lights on, and have a gram of S-isomerketamine on the table beside me. It is roughly midnight. I weigh out 0.25 grams and split into 3 lines and crush them up as good as I can. This is my third experience of ketamine, and by far the deepest. Once the first line goes up my nose, I wait a couple of minutes and feel myself getting very messed up. My mind is all wonky, and my entire body feels very sensitive and sharp. The texture of my skin is very different, almost like sand. I don't know if I'd call the texture pleasant or uncomfortable, probably both. I can feel the taste of ketamine dripping back into my throat. It tastes like medicine and the idea of hospitals. I do both of the remaining lines, adding up to about 250 milligrams in total. I try to turn on Spotify while I'm still able to, but I'm not fast enough, and end up with the song Somebody That I Used to Know playing on repeat. I was using headphones at this point. Note: my time perception during the K-hole is extremely messed up, so it felt like a couple minutes and infinitely long simultaneously. I lay back on my huge pillow, basically half sitting as I cover my eyes with a thin blanket. For whatever reason, I quickly squeeze one of my pillows, and it feels like it's made out of sand. A very satisfying squeeze. At this point, I lose control of my body and enter an infinite black void, starting to see 3D geometry appear around me. It's monotone and quite dim. It's not regular psychedelic geometry, but rather composed of weird shapes and angles. I'm being pulled down through my bed, and I start rotating backwards. I do a complete flip and start sliding forward like on a water slide. I can feel my body flying quite fast, and I do a couple flips like you would on a looping roller coaster. My body isn't going forward anymore, but moving in a continuous loop, which started rotating sideways. Imagine a huge hollow sphere sliding around inside of it, and that's what it was like. The spinning calmed down, and I was floating in the void for a couple of seconds, when I start to feel my body getting stretched. I become very elongated, and end up bigger than the entire universe itself. At the time, this all made sense in my head. I thought to myself, so this is what infinity feels like. I'm bigger than infinity. From this point onwards, my internal monologue was almost non-existent. Over the course of a couple seconds, I experienced a sped up vision of my entire drive to IKEA earlier the same day. Colour is present, and I can see the green grass and the blue skies. I'm not sure how, but I end up in a circular room of sorts. It's made of continuous seeping black fog, and I'm floating in the middle of it. I get the feeling that this is happening either very deep down in the Earth's core, or in some sort of devilish afterlife. I don't have a body anymore. It's just my soul floating there. I understand what's going on. There are exactly 8 paths to pick from, and only one leads back to Earth, back to my life. If I picked the wrong one, I would cease to exist. At this point I had no idea that I had even taken a drug, and I legitimately thought I was already dead. I pick one and start floating into it. Darkness ensues me, and my extremely elongated body returns. I feel it wrap around a long conveyor belt suspended in darkness, and my body gets dragged along with it. At first, it drags me deeper down into the void, but it bends and eventually starts bringing me up again. I keep going up as the universe shifts into 2D. I can see myself getting dragged up from a third-person perspective. The song playing becomes very apparent. I can hear every single instrument playing separately, and it's just pure bliss and comfort. The lyrics speak to me, and I understand that it's about me. I enjoy it for a bit until it takes a weird turn. Suddenly it sounds unpleasant, and the harmony of the song is non-existent, just a bunch of sounds mashed together. This part of the experience is quite emotional for me. At some point I eventually open my eyes and remove the blanket. I don't recognise the room I'm in. I get a strong sense of deja vu and memories, but I cannot connect the dots. I have no idea where I am, or what's going on, or what I just experienced, so I start to get scared. What if I die? How will my family react? But then I realise, it's okay. Me and my family will always be together. We are one. I'm sure of it. I just experienced the afterlife, and there was a comforting presence telling me it will all be okay in the end. Even if I die, I will see my family again soon enough. I don't remember too much from after this point, apart from ranting about how precious life is to my closest friend through text messages. I'd already told him I was going to take ketamine, so he was aware of what was going on. I also remember trying to walk around a bit, but I would just fall over and roll to my destination. This is basically all I remember from the experience. It was very fulfilling and gave me purpose the following week. K-holes are otherworldly. I quite literally cannot explain the absurdness of what I experienced, even if it looks like I just did. And the mental aspect of it was even more crazy. Thanks for reading this, if anyone did. I spent 40 minutes reflecting and writing on it. Edit. I don't condone the use of ketamine though. Sure, it might have been healing, but ketamine is also addictive, and I experienced cravings for a while after this. A half-gram ketamine reincarnation trip report, posted by an unknown user to the drug subreddit 10 years ago. Wow, Last night was probably one of the best and worst nights of my life, and definitely one of the weirdest. I have to say, I was not expecting this to happen at all, as the rapid come-up, half of which I'm unable to remember, scared me a lot. With my personality and lack of self-control, I really should have known to make sure that I prepared only what I had planned to snort, as all 500 milligrams sat in front of me at the time of my endeavour. After days of careful researching regarding the correct dose to experience a considerable K-hole, I had originally planned to dose around 225 milligrams in total, spaced into 3 bumps, each 5 minutes apart. Taking into account that I am a fairly large individual, around 225 pounds, I decided that it would be more than enough. I initially remember snorting the first 150 milligram line, which I remember to be very harsh, making my throat instantly feel very dry, giving the impression that I was going to be stuck with a horrible drip for the rest of the high. When I stopped feeling the drip is anybody's guess though, and after about 2 minutes, I vividly remember dosing a further 50 milligram bump as I was coming up, consciously making the decision to no longer redose. Unaware to me though, during the course of the high I had completely cleaned off the ketamine from the case on which I kept the drug, meaning that I had snorted a total of 500 milligrams within the first 5 to 10 minutes, as it only took 5 minutes to come up at such a dose. Once I realised this, I became slightly worried. However, I had very little time to give thought to such a thing, as I was being thrown into the void. At this point, I knew it was going to be one hell of a ride. I had set up music very messily and fast prior to dosing, as I had my headphones plugged into the TV which sat next to me. I found the music to fit perfectly with the drug, and believe it very much benefited the start of the high. It almost felt like the music was my life. I couldn't do anything without it. It controlled me in a simply ineffable way. As I began my journey into a different reality, I was listening to Schwongel's Museum of Consciousness, which is very suitable for the experience. My whole reality was warping with the music. My movements were robotic, and I had little to no control over myself at all. I was forced to just go with the high and let it control me in any way it felt. The music began getting very psychedelic, as I was vaguely remember sliding left and right with it. My memory is very vivid at this point. All of a sudden, my headphones got pulled out of the TV position next to me, and the music started playing out of the TV itself. I was immediately snapped out of the trance to which I was in, as I unplugged the TV. It must have took me about 30 seconds. I felt as if I had just jumped up 100 meters into the air, only to slowly fall out of the sky, grabbing my heart out of the wall, only to fall back into the bottomless pit of my consciousness, being pulled through my pillow. From the impression I had been given through my research, I had assumed that my body was to be still and numb the entire trip, not moving throughout the high. But the case was very much the opposite. It was as if my body became my mind and consciousness, and my mind became my body. They both moved in complete unity and became one entity. I was cycling through different places and states, as it felt as though I was living about 5 different realities in consciousness at once, all seeming to be a variation of another and slightly different. At one point, it almost seemed impossible to even swallow, and when I tried this, my whole reality just shook, unaware of what I was or what was happening. It all just simply felt like a dream. I eventually gained enough control to reach for the bottle of water that was next to me. Thank you for telling me to bring one, as it made the drip much more comfortable and manageable. It was like the bottle both existed and didn't exist at once. It was there, but it also wasn't. I was living out different realities at once, and honestly, I didn't know which one was real. Additionally, the bottle almost felt sacred. It was like when I carefully unscrewed the eternal bars which kept the contents contained, a huge amount of energy was released, and sent waves of sacred energy resonating around the room. It must have taken me about 5 minutes from grabbing the bottle to me drinking it, as I observed the wonders appearing in front of me falling into yet another consciousness. At this point, I almost got scared. I tried to convince myself that it was simply just a drug. It felt like I'd ruined everything. I'd made a massive mistake, and would become stuck within the endless paradigm for eternity, cycling through what was, what will be, and what I wish was. I honestly didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know where I was, or even if I was alive. This is where I received an almost life-changing experience. I found out exactly what it was like to be dead. I could live exactly how I wanted to, and live as many imaginary lives as I wanted. And it was completely real. I was reborn and died. The principle of cause and effect in perfect rhythm. But then it came to my mind that I'm simply in my bedroom, and that there was something happening to me. And this truly was an enlightening experience, giving me an insight on how things should be. Although some people had said it, I'd not really considered such a thing at all. At that point, I was violently sick over the side of my bed onto my bedroom floor several times. I'm unsure of whether this is the reason to such an event, but I was told that weed, even if smoked the previous day, can make you sick on ketamine. I had not smoked weed during the high because I didn't want to change the high at all, but I had done that morning, so it was possible that this had contributed towards it. It just came out of nowhere. I didn't understand what was happening to me, but I simply accepted it, as I had no control over myself still at that point, and continued to ride in and out of hyperspace. The whole peak of the high to which I had a lack of control over myself must have lasted just over 2 hours, as I looked at the clock after the sudden decline, returning back to the living world. I was shocked by this, as people had told me of a high lasting of only an hour. However, due to the amount I unintentionally dosed, it is no surprise. When I turned my TV back on, I learnt that I had only been listening to my music for about 11 minutes since I snorted my first line, which amazed me. This was the longest 11 minutes of my life, and half of the conscious high took place in this time as my memory serves, which I understand is not very well, as it is all extremely vivid. From the start of the experience to unplugging the music felt an hour at least, with the whole experience itself lasting an eternity. I'm still unsure of what to think about the truly amazing experience at the moment, but my head is still spinning with things around me not feeling right, with my whole world feeling like a dream and unreal. It is extremely disturbing. It is now the morning after the trip, and I thought that this is to be the first thing I need to do while it is fresh in my memory. I'm aware that this is a long read, and I hope that you gain something from it, or even just find it interesting to read through, but I needed to write this either way. Exploring Space Heights and Ocean Depths. A ketamine trip report by Disco Goat, uploaded to Earwid July 27, 2018. Basic information about myself. Age 22, weight 81 kilograms. Previous experience with substances is various opiates, opioids, benzos, methylphenidate, cannabis and kratom. My trip with ketamine yesterday was as spontaneous as it could be. I just decided that I'm bored, and I brought up my last ampoule of pharma-grade mind-juiced, Ketanest, or esketamine, 25mg over a milliliter in a 2ml ampoule, so 50mg in total. Welp, there it goes, the last boy. I took standard precautions for injecting substances into myself. I grabbed a fresh, sterile syringe and aspiration needle to pull out the mind juice out of the glass ampoule container. A sterile injection needle, 23 grams x 1, blue colour, and some alcohol swabs. I disinfected the ampoule, broke off the head, aspirated the insides, switched the needles. Voila, there it is, prepared to send you off into the depths of your mind. I turned off the computers, dimmed the LED light strips, lay down into my bed. In my mind, I revised how an intramuscular injection should be given, and I went with it. I chose to inject into the M. vastus lateralis, in the lateral middle of my thigh, as I wasn't comfortable with injecting into the deltoid muscle on my shoulder. I estimated the position of the injection, disinfected it with the alcohol swab. I grabbed the muscle, so I lifted it off my muscle and pushed the needle inside. Remember, the angle should always be 90 degrees for intramuscular injections. Always grab it so that you have it gripped at the barrel between your thumb and index finger and middle finger for extra firm grip. It stung a bit at first, but it wasn't so damn uncomfortable despite the quantity of the solution, which was 2ml. When I pulled out the needle, it continued to sting for a bit, but it wasn't too distracting, as it soon dissipated. I soon felt a sensation that felt like if something was spilt on my thigh under the site where I was injecting, but when I looked it wasn't. Nothing was spilled or was coming out from the injection site. I injected at 22:35, so that would be the T plus 0 hours. I started to feel the tingling throughout my body at around 3 minutes in. I decided it was time to let it go and stop resisting, as the feeling was getting too intense. I turned off the sounds on my phone, covered myself with a blanket, and laid my hands beside my body, with pillows supporting my upper body, so I was in a semi-sitting position on the bed. I closed my eyes. Here's where the really good stuff sets in. I felt like I was Play-Doh plastiline the whole trip. My mind was completely cut off from my body. At first it felt like somebody was pushing a big pipe under my bedsheets, as if it would like to lift me onto my right side. Then, it rolled me onto the left side like an ocean wave so powerful it flushed me into the abyss of open space. My body was melting and turning into dust at the same time, mixing with the matter that flushed me away from reality. There I was, tripping harder than I ever was. I thought it wasn't so hard, but boy oh boy I was wrong. The visuals were unrepeatable, despite the fact I had my eyes closed. I felt like I was floating in deep space with stars around me, the planets as separate globes spinning and travelling beside me, who was travelling throughout the space as a blob of well-heated Play-Doh plastiline. And then, suddenly, all the surroundings snapped and closed as a book. I thought my body was ripped apart, disintegrated and reassembled on a vast red planet of desert and sandstorms. It genuinely looked like the common conception of Mars. I was floating piece by piece throughout the planet, when suddenly everything became shifting like when you mix the Rubik's Cube. I found myself again in the vast nothingness of deep space, inhabited only by countless stars shining in the distance. Faintly, I could hear my heart beating. I can often hear my heartbeat because of the hypertension, so I was reassured that I wasn't dead, because I thought that I had forgot breathing. Good. Life status checked. Now back to the travel. I was reassembled again piece by piece in a mist of foggy colours of the rainbow, when suddenly, it started to feel like I was turned upside down, head first, and plunged into the water. Where did the water come from? I'm in deep space. Never mind. The hearing was the same as when you're diving underwater, with small bubble sounds coming from every side you can imagine. Suddenly I started to segment into 4 cubes, but wait, where was the 4th cube? Oh shit. It was coming towards me like a freight train at full speed, when it hit me. I found myself again in this vast black nothingness of space. I was spinning like a multicoloured fidget spinner attached onto a power drill, which landed onto a ledge of a large precipice on Mars. The winds were absolutely packed with stars, like they were so intense they could even be blown off by the winds. Suddenly, a tornado formed in the distance, scaring me so I panicked a bit. But I reassured myself that everything is okay, and I quickly calmed down. The tornado took shape of a hurricane eye, like the one you see from satellite pictures, just that it was vertically placed onto the surface of the planet I was on, and the middle wasn't blue or white, but pitch black. Shit, it was a black hole. That's why it was sucking all the stars and all matter inside it. I gave in, released the resistance, and became a needle-shaped bullet, speeding into the abyss of the blackness that was sucking inside itself everything it came in its way. I found myself wandering throughout this white space that I didn't have any memory of, and suddenly, I was in an all-white space with lots of people around me, similar to the New York streets in the downtown on a busy day. I walked through the space, ignoring all the people, when I suddenly realised that I know all these people. They were my relatives who passed away, some even before I was born, but their faces were lifelike. They looked like they were really in front of me. I couldn't comprehend how the hell this was possible, but then I realised that I memorised their pictures I was shown pretty well, and I have quite a good imagination to imagine how their faces look like. My grandpa, who died before I was even born, my other grandpa, and grandma who I visited but are already dead, and my great-grandparents from my dad and mum's side, they were all there, and it was almost cathartic to meet them in such a way. Suddenly I was lifted in the air, and crushed by a cube that fell down from the sky as the space disintegrated into cubes, and I was again in the pitch-black environment. My right leg got pulled and stretched into the space, again like the heated Play-Doh plastiline, and I was stretched into infinity, until I was clumped into a ball, which was rolling through the suddenly appearing red-coloured desert of an unknown planet. Beneath me was the soft sand, which twirled in the wind which I didn't feel, and above me were countless stars, which was stretched like I was a few moments ago. I was speeding into infinity when I regained feeling of my body, which contours I hardly visualised. I tried to move my arms, and barely succeeded to swallow the saliva that accumulated in my mouth. My legs were completely cut off from my nervous system, and moving them was impossible, so I hadn't even attempted to do that. The visualisation of my body disappeared again in a wave of imaginary water that was rolling to the left, and blackness appeared once again. I was lifted like the soul would leave my body. I was flying. My whole body I was looking at from above was tingling, but I couldn't see below my waist, like I was literally just existing to my waist, as if my legs weren't there at all. Soon also that vision disappeared, and the whole picture just slammed in my face, reducing me to nothing. It seemed like I wasn't existing anymore. Felt like I died right there and then. I again checked for the sound of my heartbeat, as I again genuinely thought I had stopped breathing. It was there, so I let it go, and I was engulfed in a sky full of stars which slowly arranged into a circle and started spinning around me. Suddenly I was getting slight sensations from my body, but then the feeling of falling back into the waves of water that engulfed my imaginary body swung and threw it around the unrecognisable environment, which could be either deep space or a deep ocean. I was one with the indistinguishable water or vacuum, when I splashed onto a soft, warm surface. There was nothing. It was pitch black, with occasional stars and twinkles in the space I was in. After a period of time, which felt like an hour, I slowly opened my eyes. My teeth were tingling. They were feeling stiff, like when you get that tingling feeling when you hit your arm on the nerve in the elbow. I clenched my teeth and it felt so good. My joints all over the body were stiff, rigid, and felt like I haven't moved them for a week. I was in the same pose, semi-sitting on my bed, covered with my blanket as when the trip started. I thought the trip had lasted for several hours, but it lasted just under an hour. It was T plus 56 minutes when I looked on my phone. It was mind-boggling when I realised I was tripping for just under an hour, when I thought it had been a period of several hours. I decided it was time to go to sleep, but turning around into the fetal position was a struggle, so I remained in the same position, turned my head onto the left side, and my body succumbed to the wave coming from my right side that took me on the last ride throughout the mix of the vast nothingness of space and the unknown depths of the sea, and then slowly, but surely, bringing me back to reality, materialising into a normal human form of semi-anaesthetised pile of flesh after T plus 1 hour and 10 minutes. I struggled to sit up and retrace through what the actual hell I've been to in the past hour, still feeling that slight tingliness throughout my body and what felt like micro-electrical jerks of my muscles that tried to contact my brain. I sat like that for a few minutes, recapping the experience on the verge of crying, which was the result of the rush of happiness from realising how beautiful, amazing, fascinating and weird the human mind can be when the moment and the substance is right. I finally rolled to the side, curled into the fetal position, hugged a pillow and fell asleep with tears of joy in my eyes, tingling in my body, feeling happy and content. This trip taught me to appreciate the human mind and not to underestimate it under any circumstances. Who knows what powers the mind has to offer? Maybe my trip represents what the afterlife looks like when we die and our body shuts down, leaving only the person's mind untouched. If we look at the mechanism of action by which ketamine works, it basically cuts the connection to the sensations of the body, leaving the mind on its own, allowing it to roam free through the vast possibilities it offers. It could do such magnificent things at every time we would like to, but all the sensations from the reality caught by our bodies are just a disturbance, an interference that inhibits the mind's ability to create such beautiful scapes and feelings in any environment you can think of. The mind is truly incredible and remarkable when it is allowed to roam free, to create whatever it wants without the interference of the outer world it lives in. It isn't said just for fun that there's such silence in the room when ketamine is given through anesthesia that you could hear a sewing needle drop on the floor. Peace and out.